there, welcome to this IELTS reading lesson. Today we're going to focus on the summary completion question type. I hope you're ready. Summary completions are very exciting and a very unique type of question. So I'm going to go through some reminders, the different types of summary completions that you might find on the exam, and then I'll show you a guide and a step-by-step example with our helpful scanning techniques. So I hope you're ready. I find this question type very fun because we're completing information and it's not as heavy as some of the other questions like matching information or matching features, which are considered to be a bit more difficult. Instead, with this question type, we'll have to be aware of paraphrasing and synonyms and really looking at what would fit best in our summary. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. I will introduce you to this question type by looking at our summary here on the left-hand side and our passage on the right-hand side. Now, first, you'll need to be aware that summary completions can come in 3 different formats. Sometimes you'll need to fill in the gaps choosing from a word bank, and our example today will have a word bank. In fact, I see these very often. Now, a lot of people would think that the summary completion question type with a word bank is easier, but that's actually not the case. Think about it. It would be far too easy if these words fit perfectly in our summary, just like they're included in the passage. So usually the IELTS exam will contain a few obvious tricks. So for example, one of these may seem like the obvious answer to a given gap. However, with a closer reading and with a better scanning technique, we might find that that's not the case. Keep in mind that most correct answers will be synonyms rather than an exact word from this text here. So just keep that in mind. All right, so that's one type of summary completion. Another summary completion option would be a gap fill, but simply enough, it does not contain a word bank. So we would have to just scan the text for our own ideas and input words without the use of a word bank. And then the third type is something called a flow chart. It basically presents information in boxes or steps linked by arrows. Also, keep in mind that the summary will usually come from one section of the text. Now, this is a usual procedure. So, for example, these 4 answers could come from perhaps the beginning or the middle of the text or just the end of the text. It's rare that you'll see the first answer in the first paragraph and the last answer in the last paragraph. They're usually going to be confined to an area, so this is a bit helpful. Also, they usually come in order, but again, don't just rely on that information. Keep in mind that it is a question type that is prone to having its answers in order, but this is never 100% a given fact. And so for our techniques, we will have to scan for information. This is going to be our biggest strategy because we want to cut down on time and find the area that will contain our answers and also the sentences that will contain our answers. Of course, with any completion question, the grammar and the words surrounding this gap fill will also be important to look at. So we'll have to make sure that our answer makes sense in terms of the passage and the information in the passage, and also grammatically. And of course, don't be surprised if the answers take on different forms than what is presented in the passage. So let's just say that descriptivists is included in the passage, but it's included in its singular form. Now keep in mind that since we are provided with a word bank, we won't have to write out the words. We'll just have options from A through I, and we'll just have to write the letter. This is included in our instructions. There may be some summary completion exercises, however, that do not have a word bank and will ask you to write the words. Also, flowchart examples would be the same. So you'll have to keep in mind that you need to read the instructions. Like most completion questions, you'll have to write only one word or up to 2 words or no more than 3 words and a number. It depends on the question you have, so be sure to read your instructions. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with some helpful reminders for the summary completion questions. All right, and so these reminders will be really beneficial to you if you do not have a word bank or if you have a flowchart example. And while we won't necessarily use these reminders today in our step-by-step example, I just want you to be aware of them for future practice and future study, because you never know what type of summary completion question you will get on your exam. So I just want to run through these briefly, and these can be put in effect for any type of completion question you have. So that also goes for short answer and table completion. If you have numbers, they can be written using figures, so the number itself, or you can spell them out using words like 10. Just make sure that you remember they count as one word. Also, hyphenated words count as one word. A lot of students get confused about this because they see, for example, open and minded, but they forget the hyphen. This hyphen joins these 2 words, and so they count as one word. Do not use contractions. You're taking a formal academic exam, and so you will not see contractions like can't, don't in the test, and so don't use them. When you're writing and completing short answer or tables or summaries, prepositions and articles are usually optional. You're most likely going to have to write keywords or specific phrases, specific words that you find in the passage, and these are not going to be articles like the. If you do have to write, make sure you're neat and you're very precise. Usually capital letters guarantees this, and it makes everything very clear for the person checking your exam. And again, if you have to write names or you have to write words and you find yourself having to write the name of a researcher or a scientist, last names are usually sufficient, because in the academic world, surnames or last names are what researchers and scientists usually go by. So in the passage, you'll probably see the first name and surname together once, and then that person will be referenced with surname from there on out. Okay, again, we won't directly use these today in our example with a word bank, but always keep these in mind. Let's go to our guide. Now, for our first step, it should not be surprising that we're going to read the information. This is the first thing. By information, I mean the summary. So not the passage, but the summary, and we're also going to understand the words that we have in our word bank. After we've done this, we're going to identify the grammar. So our second step relies on understanding what types of words are missing from the paragraph. Are they nouns and verbs, or are they adverbs and adjectives? This is really important because we can already set aside some ideas for which words from the word bank will fit in the passage. In our case, since we have a word bank, we'll also have to look at singular nouns or plural nouns and try to see which would fit in the gaps. After we've done that, we're going to scan the passage with some clear words that we have identified in our preparation stages of steps 1 through 2, and then we're going to answer the questions. So notice that even though we have 4 questions and a rather short summary, it's still important to do our preparation work, because if we don't do that, we're going to read blindly, and that'll take up too much time and distract us from what we need to know. All right, so let's get started with step 1. Okay, so we have our step 1, read information. So we're going to read our information in the summary that we were provided with right here on the right-hand side. Also, we'll take a look at our answer options just so that we see the type of words. We'll do this more in step 2. For now, let's just read the information and see what we can gather from reading the summary paragraph. So we're looking for themes, ideas, this will be sort of a preview to what we will be reading. Okay, so let's go ahead and read. According to blank, there is only one correct form of language. Linguists who take this approach to language place great importance on grammatical blank. Conversely, the view of blank, such as Joseph Priestley, is that grammar should be based on blank. Okay, so we have our 4 gaps. You might have noticed that we're going to be talking about language and perhaps some grammar. We're looking at someone in the language field. So again, obviously it's academic, it's a bit scientific in the linguistic approach. So this is a nice preview. Now let's look at some keywords that we can use to scan the text. So if I start here at the first sentence, I would say keywords or phrases would be this right here. It's quite a long phrase, but I'm going to underline all of it. And it says there is only one correct form of language. The fact that it says only one is an excellent clue, because we'll have to look for a group of people perhaps that believe in this fact, that there is only one correct form of language. So I would go ahead and underline that. Okay, let's look at the second sentence. Linguists who take this approach to language place great importance on grammatical blank. And here, I would say the most important part is importance on grammatical blank. So I haven't underlined linguists because I already know we're going to be talking about language. And so linguists are sort of a given. I'm sure we're going to see this word quite often in our text. So for me, I think importance on grammatical or something about grammar is the best keyword here. Then the last part, conversely, the view of blank, such as Joseph Priestley, is that grammar should be based on blank. So in this case, it's very clear that this name, Joseph Priestley, will lead us to the answer for number 11 and probably also number 12. So I would say Joseph Priestley is the best keyword in this case. So you see, we don't have that many keywords when compared to other types of questions. That's because this summary completion will also rely on our word bank, and it's just a different type of question. So I'm going to go ahead and clear our screen just to show the keywords from the lesson, and this is exactly what we underlined together. All right, great job. Now we're going to go to step 2, which is going to be identifying the grammar. So here we're going to pay attention to our word bank. We're just going to skim again through the summary paragraph and make notes focusing on the parts of speech that could possibly follow the words before the gap fill, okay? So here we're reading more for the grammar. In the first step, we were reading more to get an idea and to look at keywords. So I'm looking for words that could come after to, grammatical, of, and on. And so first, if I think of the types of words, I find myself thinking mostly of nouns, because according to someone or something, grammatical is an adjective that would describe a noun, the view of someone or something, similar to number 9, and based on someone or something, which is a noun. So I would say these are all going to be nouns. Now we'll have to look at our table to see if by chance we have an adjective or a verb that we can eliminate. Again, this is a standard question in that they're all nouns. So there are some phrases. So we have, for example, popular speech, but at the end of it, these are all considered as nouns. But that's okay. Step 2 is not over yet. Now, what we can also do here is look at each number and think about which options wouldn't work or which options would perhaps be a bit strange. So for example, if I look at 9, according to rules, according to prescriptivist, these would all pretty much make sense. According to change would be a bit odd, Grammatically, it makes sense, but it's a bit odd, so I can already sort of rule that out or make a note that I is probably not the best option for 9, but we'll see. If we look at 10, keep in mind that this has something to do with grammar. So grammatical is the adjective that describes this word. In theory, and also according to grammar, all of these options would be correct, but if you think about it, some options might sound strange. So for example, grammatical popular speech, okay? You might know that popular speech doesn't always connect with grammatical rules, so you could also keep another note. That could be a bit strange. All right, so number 11, now this could be a specific group of people because it is the view of perhaps descriptivists or experts or linguists. So this might be a group of people. A clue that this is a group of people is Joseph Priestley because he is a person. So such as this person, he might be part of some of these groups. So that's why number 11 is probably a group. And number 12 is also a noun, most likely a subject or a thing. It could also be a person, but I would say it's more of a subject because we have a person here. And he says it's that grammar should be based on something. So I would say 12 is more of a subject or a thing, even though all of these options technically in theory would also make sense here. So it's a bit difficult in that we can't really eliminate anything right from the beginning, but we can make a couple notes of some options that would be strange. And it's helpful that we already know we're going to be looking for nouns. So I will clear our screen and we'll go ahead and show the grammar, which is basically what we just talked about. But you see we have our 4 nouns and we have some things that might be a bit strange, like grammatical popular speech, okay? And the fact that we have subjects and things as well. Okay, so now for step 3, we are ready to scan our passage. All right, so we have step 3, scan the passage. So now we're ready to put our skills to the test. And as we noted from the previous steps, we're going to look for these keywords that are one correct form of language, Joseph Priestley, grammar, and language again. So I'm just going to keep those in mind as I go ahead and scan. And so like I said before, we're talking about language, we're talking about linguistics. So you'll see language quite often in this section. But if I look here, just from scanning briefly, I am already caught by the fact that I am looking at grammar in this paragraph here where I see grammar. And I also saw something about language earlier in this paragraph above. So I'm already drawn here to, I would say, paragraph 3. This would be paragraph 4. And if I go just a bit further down, I see our keyword name, Joseph Priestley. So the fact that I see Joseph Priestley down here and I see grammar and language up above points to the idea that I'll be looking in these sections here, just because I've seen my keywords. So I'll clear our screen so we can do this in a bit more organized manner. I'll go down here again. And remember, this was our summary. I'll underline our words just so that it's similar to test day when you underline your own keywords. All right, so I noticed language in paragraph 3. And just to remind myself of number 9, it says, according to, okay, we had number 9, there's only one correct form of language. And in number 9, we thought perhaps it'll be a group of people. So I'm just going to read here to get an idea. And I see prescriptivism, which is similar to one of our words here, H, prescriptivists, is the view that one variety of language has an inherently higher value than others, and that this ought to be imposed on the whole of the speech community. Wow. So just by finding language here, I think I found the answer to number 9. So it says, according to blank, there is only one correct form of language. And this says, in its most general sense, prescriptivism is the view that one variety of language has an inherently higher value than others, and that this ought to be imposed on the whole of the speech community. So you see how the wording is different. The wording is even different for prescriptivism and prescriptivists, because here we're looking at people, here we're looking at the idea or the view. However, this would prove number 9 as correct if we put in prescriptivists, because according to the people who believe in this idea of prescriptivism, there is only one correct form of language. Or in other words, there is one variety of language that has an inherently higher value than others. So there we go. You see how it will not be word for word. In fact, in this paragraph, we were not looking at prescriptivists, but it's included in this box because the test basically wants to understand if you can understand that 9 is proven correct by this information. So by reading this, it is true that prescriptivists believe there is only one correct form of language. All right, great. So the 9 would be H, prescriptivists. Okay, so let's clear out. And we looked at grammar exactly in the next paragraph. So I'll just go ahead and underline that word that we found together. And again, just to be reminded of 10, linguists who take this approach to language place great importance on grammatical blank. Okay, so let's go ahead and read here quickly to get an idea. All the main languages have been studied prescriptively, especially in the 18th century approach to the writing of grammars and dictionaries. The aims of these early grammarians were threefold. They wanted to codify the principles, they wanted a means of settling disputes, they wanted to point out what they felt to be common. So you see how I'm not reading exactly word for word and really understanding everything. I want to find what linguists place a great importance on. So I'm just going to keep reading. The fact that there are 3 things doesn't really help me because that was not noticed in our summary completion. So I'm going to move along here. The authoritarian nature of this approach is best characterized by its reliance on rules of grammar. And right here, I think I have found our answer because it says that linguists who take this approach to language place great importance on grammatical something. And here it says it's best characterized by its reliance on rules of grammar. And you see how this is in quotation marks. It's word for word what we have here in F. You might think that it could be a trick and that the test is trying to trick you, but like I said, it's in quotation marks, it is direct, and really it's the best option because grammar isn't dissected as much as it is in this paragraph. So we're definitely in the right paragraph and it makes sense. Great importance on grammatical rules. There's a reliance. That's a nice synonym, another way to say great importance on. So I would go ahead and put F as 10. Excellent. So we have H for 9, F for 10. Let's go and visit our friend Joseph Priestley. We found him in the 5th paragraph right around here. I will highlight him so you can find him. And let's just be reminded of 11 and 12. It says, the view of blank, such as Joseph Priestley, is that grammar should be based on blank. So let's go ahead and figure out who Joseph Priestley is because it's probably obvious at this point that he is not a prescriptivist because it says conversely. So let's continue here. I'll just start. In the second half of the 18th century, we already find advocates of this view. So the view is probably located earlier up here. So let me go ahead and give this a read as well. These attitudes are still with us. There's a linguistic standard that has to be maintained. Nevertheless, there's an alternative point of view that is concerned less with standards than with the facts of linguistic usage. This approach is summarized in the statement that it is the task of the grammarian to describe, not prescribe, to record the facts of linguistic diversity and not to attempt the impossible tasks of evaluating language variation or halting language change. Okay, so again, it's a very intense academic type of reading, but the word that we can see here that is key is describe, okay? So if you think of prescribe, this has the same root as prescriptivist, which makes sense because prescriptivist was number 9. In this case, the alternative view states that it is the task of the grammarian to describe. So if we take this word describe, look in our table for something that has the same root, we would be called to letter A, descriptivists. Also, if I look here at this first sentence, you see descriptivists and prescriptivists. Now, these are the two groups of linguistics in our passage and also in our table. So the fact that we see this sentence with these two titles, this sentence with the same root, so describe, prescribe, descriptivist, prescriptivist, and the fact that we see conversely in this sentence makes me extremely confident that 11 is a descriptivist. But you see how it wasn't contained in just one sentence. In order to be 100% confident, we used different bits and pieces from this section. All right, in any case, we can rest assured that 11 is a descriptivist, and we have to think more again about the grammar, so let's continue reading because we have to see that the grammar should be based on something. So let's continue. Back to Joseph Priestley, whose Rudiments of English Grammar insist that the custom of speaking is the original and only just standard of any language. Well, there we go, right there. And it's very clear that the custom of speaking. Now, again, since we have quotations, this was taken from a direct source. So you see the English is a bit old and antiquated and a bit formal. Here in our text box, we don't necessarily have the custom of speaking, but we do have popular speech, and that is an excellent synonym. And if we input C, popular speech, into 12, it makes complete sense and goes right along with this idea in the passage. So just to read it for you, conversely, the view of descriptivists, such as Joseph Priestley, is that grammar should be based on popular speech, or here, the custom of speaking. Excellent. All right, so let me put in C for number 12. Just to remind ourselves, we had prescriptivist for 9, so letter H, and then F for letter 10, which was rules. And again, we found this all in this section. So basically paragraphs 3 through 5. Okay, I'll clear our screen. Again, we saw it up here. So 3, 4, and 5, and a little bit here, the first sentence, just to make us more confident of our answers. Okay, so we're going to show our answers, and here, H, F, A, C, exactly, and we see all of our answers. So number 9, number 10, number 11, and 12. And you see how they did come in order. They were confined to a particular section, which is common for this question type. So that was excellent. And the important thing to note is that the only word that was exactly the same in the passage as in our box was rules. And again, that's mostly because that was in quotation marks. And so rules either came from a direct source or it was a word that was given more emphasis. So it wasn't a trick in this case. Just make sure that you're aware of your synonyms and that you are ready to dissect the passage a little bit. It's sort of like an adventure where you have to find the correct meanings. Okay, excellent job. That was really fun. Let's go through some recaps to wrap up this lesson. All right, here's a bit of a recap, some do's and don'ts. First thing, do analyze the summary that you're presented with and the word bank if it is given to you. Also, do identify the parts of speech that would fit in the gaps. Also understand, if you can, if a plural or a singular noun is needed. This will help you eliminate some options from the very beginning. In our case, they were all nouns, but this could help you, and it's always good to use these 2 steps to prepare yourself for the passage. Of course, when you get to the passage, do scan. Do not read for general information. And a nice tip is to try starting with the last question and working your way up. As we talked about before, a common trick with summary completion questions is to present the answers in order. So if you start with the last question, you know that you don't have to read further down in the passage. This is just something to try. Things not to do: definitely don't read the entire passage first, especially with the summary completion. You want to read the summary that you are given so you know what to look for in the passage. Also, like I said earlier, don't read for general information. You can read for fun on your own time, but during the exam and practicing for the exam, you'll have to use your scanning technique and, when necessary, the skimming technique. And also, this is very important, don't write the incorrect item. It would be such a shame for you to have gotten all the answers correct in theory and then have written something incorrect. So for example, in our passage and for our question, we had to write letters A through I. And so you have to write those letters, not the actual word like descriptivist. And this seems like a silly error, but a lot of students fall for it because they see words and they don't read the instructions. So make sure you're clear about what you have